They laughed when the janitor stepped into a room filled with the brightest minds in America. What happened next would leave 500 scholars speechless and force a powerful CEO to question everything she thought she knew about intelligence, success, and respect. The grand ballroom of the Hawthorne Institute shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that cast warm reflections across polished marble floors. Rows of scholars, researchers, investors, and technology executives filled every seat. The annual Frontier Intelligence Summit was the kind of event where billion-dollar ideas were born and careers were made. At the center of it all stood Victoria Sterling, the celebrated CEO of Sterling Quantum Technologies. At 38, she had become one of the most influential leaders in artificial intelligence, and the crowd hung on every word she spoke. Her tailored navy suit, confident posture, and effortless smile commanded attention before she even reached the stage. Around her, cameras flashed while reporters hurried to capture every moment. Victoria thrived in rooms like this. She belonged here. At least, that was what everyone believed. Across the ballroom, unnoticed by nearly everyone, Ethan Brooks pushed a janitor's cart slowly along the back wall. His faded maintenance uniform blended into the background like part of the building itself. He moved quietly, collecting discarded coffee cups and straightening chairs left out of place. Most guests never looked directly at him. Some barely acknowledged his existence. Ethan preferred it that way. His attention remained fixed on his work. Every movement was calm, measured, and precise. There was something unusual about the way he carried himself, but few people ever stayed curious long enough to notice. Near the main stage, a group of renowned professors debated a complex theoretical challenge that had dominated discussions throughout the conference. The problem involved a breakthrough framework that promised to reshape the future of machine learning. Whiteboards filled with equations lined the stage. Brilliant minds had spent hours arguing over possible solutions. None had succeeded. The atmosphere shifted between excitement and frustration. Investors were watching closely. The first team to solve it stood to gain enormous prestige and potentially billions in future funding. Victoria stepped forward with a confident grin. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "it appears even our greatest scholars are stuck." Laughter rolled through the audience. A few professors exchanged embarrassed smiles. Victoria enjoyed moments like this. They reminded everyone who was leading the future. Then her gaze drifted toward the back of the room. She spotted Ethan beside his janitor's cart, quietly replacing a trash liner. A mischievous smile crossed her face. "Maybe we're overthinking this," she said. More laughter followed. "Perhaps we should let the janitor try." The room erupted. Several attendees chuckled openly. Others turned in their seats to see the man she was pointing at. Ethan froze briefly. Hundreds of eyes suddenly settled on him. Victoria folded her arms. "Come on," she said playfully. "Maybe he knows something we don't." The crowd laughed again. But Ethan didn't react the way they expected. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look angry. Instead, he slowly tied off the trash bag in his hand and placed it neatly inside the cart. Then he raised his eyes toward the stage. For the first time that evening, the room became completely still. Because there was something in Ethan Brooks' expression that no one had expected to see. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. For a long second, nobody spoke. The laughter that had filled the ballroom moments earlier faded into an uneasy silence. Ethan Brooks stood beside his janitor cart with one hand resting lightly on the handle. The bright lights above reflected across the polished floor, and 500 pairs of eyes remained fixed on him. Victoria Sterling raised an eyebrow, still wearing the confident smile that had made investors trust her and competitors fear her. "Well," she asked lightly, "are you coming up here or not?" A few scattered chuckles drifted through the crowd. Ethan looked toward the stage but said nothing. Then he simply nodded once. Not proudly, not defiantly, just calmly. The reaction surprised. Several people. Most expected him to refuse. Others expected him to look embarrassed. Instead, he pushed the cart toward the nearest wall, parked it neatly beside a service door, and returned to his work. The crowd laughed again, assuming he had chosen to walk away. Victoria smiled and turned back toward the audience. "I suppose even our volunteer expert knows his limits." More laughter followed. Yet Ethan continued working as if none of it mattered. Because in many ways, it did not. While the summit buzzed with prestige and ambition, Ethan's thoughts were somewhere else entirely. 40 miles away, in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city, his 12-year-old daughter Emily was finishing her after-school science club. At exactly 5:15 every evening, she waited outside Jefferson Middle School. At exactly 5:25, Ethan arrived to pick her up. He had never missed a pickup. Not once. The thought brought the faintest hint of a smile to his face. Years earlier, life had looked very different. Before the maintenance uniform. Before the long shifts. Before the silence. Back then, Ethan had spent his days surrounded by books, research papers, and classrooms. He had lived inside libraries and laboratories. Colleagues once described him as brilliant. Some called him gifted. Others simply called him obsessed. But none of those titles mattered after the night everything changed. When his wife, Claire, passed away after a sudden illness, the future he had built collapsed quietly around him. Opportunities disappeared. Research projects were abandoned. Academic awards collected dust inside storage boxes. Ethan had made a choice that many people never understood. He chose his daughter. While former colleagues chased recognition, Ethan learned how to braid hair, pack lunches, help with homework, and comfort a grieving child through sleepless nights. The sacrifices were real. The bills were difficult. The work was exhausting. Yet he never regretted it. Not for a second. Back inside the ballroom, Professor Nathan Pierce watched Ethan carefully from the front row. Something about the janitor seemed familiar. The way he carried himself. The way he remained. Completely unaffected by public embarrassment. Nathan frowned slightly, but could not place the feeling. Nearby, a group of graduate students whispered among themselves. "He looks way too calm," one said. Another shrugged. "Maybe he just does not understand what is happening." Nathan kept watching. He was no longer listening to the conversations about artificial intelligence. His attention remained fixed on the quiet man near the back wall. Because while everyone else saw a janitor, Nathan was beginning to notice something unusual. Ethan Brooks did not carry himself like someone standing beneath greatness. He carried himself like someone who had already walked away from it. The conference should have moved on. That was what Victoria Sterling expected. The brief joke had landed. The audience had laughed. And the focus should have returned to the challenge dominating the summit. Instead, a strange tension lingered in the ballroom. Conversations felt distracted. Scholars who had been debating fiercely only minutes earlier now glanced occasionally toward the back wall, where Ethan Brooks continued his work. On the giant screen above the stage, the unsolved problem remained displayed in bright white text against a black background. It represented the culmination of nearly 3 years of research. Universities across the country had contributed data. Technology firms had invested hundreds of millions of dollars. Venture capital groups had quietly pledged more than $8 billion in future funding to whichever organization could transform the theory into a practical framework. The challenge was not merely academic. Whoever solved it would influence the future direction of artificial intelligence for decades. Victoria stepped toward the screen once more. "Let us focus on the real experts," she said confidently. The audience nodded. Several professors returned to their notes. A panel of specialists gathered around an electronic whiteboard. Equations appeared. Models were proposed. Assumptions were challenged. Yet every path led back to the same obstacle. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The room slowly shifted from excitement to frustration. One researcher argued for a probabilistic solution. Another dismissed it immediately. A third proposed a hybrid framework. That idea failed within minutes. The debate grew more complicated with every attempt. Victoria folded her arms and listened carefully, though even she could see the growing uncertainty. The investors sitting near the front exchanged worried looks. Every failed proposal represented another reminder that nobody had solved the puzzle. Near the back of the room, Ethan finished replacing a trash liner and quietly moved toward a refreshment station. As he passed one of the side monitors, his eyes drifted briefly toward the equations. Only for a moment. Then he continued walking. Professor Nathan Pierce noticed. Something about the expression on Ethan's face caught his attention. It was subtle, barely visible. Yet Nathan could have sworn the janitor looked puzzled. Not intimidated. Not confused. Puzzled. As though he had noticed something everyone else was missing. Nathan frowned. He watched Ethan disappear behind a row of chairs. A few minutes later, another proposal collapsed under scrutiny. Groans echoed through the ballroom. One professor rubbed his temples. Another closed his laptop with visible frustration. Victoria forced a smile. "Well," she said, Innovation has never been easy. Polite laughter followed, but the confidence in the room had weakened. Then something unexpected happened. A young researcher near the front accidentally dropped a stack of printed notes. Pages scattered across the floor. Ethan happened to be nearby. Without hesitation, he bent down and helped gather them. Most people